Hello and welcome to this special broadcast. With the NDA 3.0 taking over, the focus will be on India's energy transition and to see what new reforms and investments the government is able to bring in. The World Bank has announced the second loan for India's green hydrogen mission. How will the World Bank support India's green hydrogen and energy transition? To talk about it all is Auguste Kouame, who's joining us today. He's the World Bank Country Director for India. Auguste, thank you very much for joining us here on the program. First of all, I'd like to ask you about the progress that you have made with the first development policy loan for India's clean energy transition that you had announced in June 2023. That was a $1.5 billion loan. What has been the progress on that front?
Thank you very much, Parashit, for this question. Well, the first loan came about as an effort to support the implementation of the National Green Hydrogen Mission that was issued by the Government of India in January 2023. So progress has been quite satisfactory and perhaps even impressive because already the government has moved quite fast to stimulate demand in areas such as fertilizers and refineries under the first operations that we approved, that our board approved in June 2023. And we have also worked with the government to start putting in place regulations to ensure safety of production of green hydrogen, production of electrolyzers. We've also made some steps to come up with actions for research and development on the government side that will later stimulate private investment. So some progress have been made, and I should say, beyond green hydrogen per se, the first operation has also created some dynamism in the whole renewable energy sector because, as you know, green hydrogen depends on renewable energy such as solar or wind. So the first operation has helped encourage investment in those sectors by removing the cost or some of the fees that producers will pay to connect their wind or solar energy to the grid so that this can feed into the production of green hydrogen. So these are initial steps, and it is not sufficient. That's why the second operation becomes necessary. And even the second operation may not be the last effort on the part of the World Bank to support the development of green hydrogen in India, because it is a long-term effort. The government is aiming to mobilize up to 100 billion in private investment for green hydrogen alone as part of this mission. So it will take a few years.
It will take a few years. So $1.5 billion was the first development policy loan for green hydrogen. Has that been fully utilized? And what is the latest round of funding or the development loan that you're announcing?
So the way the development policy loan works is that it provides financing for effort already made, and it doesn't necessarily finance direct activities. So yes, it has been utilized because it was part of the Government of India's budget that for the fiscal year that closed in March. So it has been utilized. This is our assumption. And the next operation hopefully will be part of the current budget cycle, and hopefully it will be utilized also for supporting the government effort, to do what it had planned to do under the National Green Hydrogen Mission to stimulate private investment and also provide initial funding to reduce the costs for research and development as well as for production of electrolyzers and actual production of green hydrogen.
Right. So the second development policy loan is for $1.5 billion.
Right.
How is this going to be utilized, and what's going to be the strategy behind deploying this fund?
So, as I said, maybe we need to explain a bit how the World Bank financing instruments work. What we're talking about here is a development policy loan, as opposed to an investment policy financing, or an investment project financing, rather. If it were an investment project financing, we would have been financing direct input or activities under the project. For a development policy loan, we do not finance direct activities under the project. We provide financing into the government budget in support of a number of policies and regulations that the government will put in place for a bigger objective, a bigger development objective. So with the utilization, the connection between the fund and the actual activities under the development policy financing is not as watertight as it is under investment project financing. So utilization is, part of the broader government budget.
Right. Any goals that you have set as part of the second loan?
Yes, the goals are very clear, both in terms of direct policies, which we call prior actions, to support the green hydrogen development, as well as in terms of supporting the broader goal of supporting the economy and stabilizing the financing, the overall financing of the government. So the goals for the policies they're in three buckets. First bucket is to stimulate green hydrogen production and consumption. And under that, we have agreement for the government to take actions to, again, as I said, to continue encouraging the bulk purchase of green hydrogen for fertilizer and for refineries and maybe for some other sectors. That will give encouragement to the private sector to invest because they will know that their output will be purchased. And the government will also increasingly encourage other hard-to-abate sectors to do likewise. Under the broader renewable energy, we're also continuing to encourage the connection between production of solar as well as wind and hopefully perhaps even floating solar as input for green hydrogen, so that the green hydrogen doesn't become so there is enough renewable energy for green hydrogen as well as for other use in the economy. And we continue to encourage the development of financing for renewable more broadly. So we're looking at, under this operation, to encourage the emergence of carbon market or development of carbon market. We continue to ensure that when private sector wants to invest in green bond, there is a framework for it, there is a taxonomy for it. So these are some of the policy goals under the operation.
Right.
And then, as I said, as broadly put, this operation also fits into the government's broader effort to stimulate growth through a stable macroeconomic framework. So it is also one of the goals to ensure that the government financing is sourced in a way that is not too costly, and our loans are not costly. They're long-term, so they provide affordable financing as well as long-term financing to the government of India for a broader development strategy.
Auguste, we would also like to ask you about the level of investments that you've seen so far. The government has set itself a target of $100 billion in investments in the green hydrogen ecosystem through the mission plan. What has been the level of interest that you've seen?
Well, we've seen a high level of interest, surprisingly. And the interest we've seen suggests that, in fact, the government's objective of 100 billion might well be exceeded when it's all said and done. Because already we're seeing that, based on our estimate, there is interest from the private sector to invest up to 70 billion already in green hydrogen production and in electrolyzer production. And this 70 billion has come 70 billion interest or announcement or commitment has come very, very fast. And in the coming years, you will see more announcement coming up. And I'm very confident that the 100 billion target will be achieved and perhaps exceeded. And this is nothing new, really, in India, where a small investment on the part of the government, accompanied by a good package of reforms, regulations, and incentives, have generated so much private investment. If we take the example of the solar parks, at our level, at the World Bank level, we provided a loan of 70 million to the government to the various states And that 70 million loan generated 4.2 billion worth of private investment in the solar parks. In the case of REWA, which I mentioned earlier, the loan to REWA, the public sector sourced World Bank loan to REWA was only 17 million, 17, and that generated more than $500 million, meaning 30 times the size of the initial loan in the form of private investment. So the National Green Hydrogen Mission, which is a 2.4 billion government program, will generate a lot of private investment and probably a lot more. So we're very encouraged that already 70 billion worth of private investment have been announced based on our calculation.
So you feel that when it comes to production of green hydrogen, deploying green hydrogen for the use in manufacturing and even exports, India could take the lead globally?
Yes, India could be one of the biggest producers of green hydrogen for initially for domestic consumption, because India has a big market already. There are a number of sectors that are very dependent on energy consumption, such as steel, even construction, transport. Those sectors will need to decarbonize, especially if they want to export their output, because with CBAM, with the Carbon Border Adjustment mechanism of the EU, if those sectors don't decarbonize, they will not be able to break into the European market or other foreign market, or they may not be able to increase their market shares. So those sectors will consume a lot of green hydrogen, which India will produce. And then there will also be an opportunity to export green hydrogen produced in India to other countries. And there is demand. Other countries, we hear that some European countries would like to import green hydrogen from India. So whenever India is ready to export its green hydrogen, there will be a market for it. But I have to say, it's a win-win for India. There is a big domestic market, and there is demand for its green hydrogen by other countries. So what needs to take place now is, expand production.
Expand production. The statement by the World Bank also said that the policy loan will also support reforms on renewable energy penetration by, for instance, incentivizing battery energy storage solutions and amending the Indian Electricity Grid Code to improve renewable energy integration into the grid. Give us a sense of how these reforms or the changes will be supported, how the World Bank will be steering these reforms along with the Indian government.
So on grid integration, for example, if you were to produce renewable energy, wind or solar somewhere, you put up your investment, you produce, and then you need to sell it to the grid. And oftentimes it's easier said than done, because you need to transport it to the grid. And to transport it to the grid, sometimes you pay transportation fees, you pay transmission fees. And sometimes actually the connection, the transmission infrastructure is not there. So what the operation does is first to put in place a framework for the government to invest more in transmission infrastructure, but more importantly is to also reduce the cost of transmission by private producers, paid by private producers into the grid. So when you produce your wind energy, you will pay less to transport it and add it to the overall grid. And there are policies that are already in place which waive those fees initially for a given period of time, say for up to 2026, and the operation will provide incentive to the government to extend that waiver period, so that when you go and produce your wind, you know that for a long period of time you will be able to connect it to the grid at low cost, and that will increase the return on your own investment. So that's one example of how the operation is helping the integration of renewable into the grid. And this is important because, again, green hydrogen means higher consumption of renewable energy, and green hydrogen should not be the only consumer of renewable energy. There are other ways, other needs for renewable energy. So if you want to push up the production of green hydrogen, you need to push up even more so the production of renewable energy so that there is no conflict between green hydrogen and other uses of renewable energy.
Right. So as you're saying, a lot of investment potential in India's green energy transition. On that note, we're taking a short break, but don't go anywhere. This conversation with World Bank's country director for India on India's green hydrogen mission and energy transition continues on the other side. Welcome back. You're watching CNBC TV18 and we are in conversation with Auguste Kouame, World Bank's country director for India on India's green hydrogen mission and the latest loan that the World Bank has announced for the country. Now, when it comes to production of green hydrogen and electrolyzers, is there a target that you're setting for the next few years or maybe till FY26?
We don't have target other than the targets that the government has set in the National Green Hydrogen Mission. We are here to support the implementation of the National Green Hydrogen Mission and meet its target. So the government has a target of stimulating private investment up to 100 billion in the production of electrolyzers and the actual production of green hydrogen. The government's own contribution to that would be, about $2 billion, but that's to stimulate the private sector's investment. The goal is really the 100 billion, and hopefully this target will be met. Our initial conversations with the government is between the two operations. We had a number of conversations, and my sense is that it could actually be exceeded.
Right. We could exceed that goal of 100 billion.
Yes.
What we would like to ask you in terms of catalyzing private sector investment, drawing in more investments, because institutions like the World Bank, the government cannot bring in all the money. It has to come from the private sector. What more can be done by this new government, which has just taken over a few days back? What can be done in terms of crowding in more private investments in the renewable energy space, in the green hydrogen mission?
Well, I think the government is already doing a number of things. If we want to focus on green hydrogen, I think the first thing that you want a government to do is to have a mission, to have a plan. And that plan is there, 2023. I think there are a number of other things that you'll want the government to do more broadly to stimulate private investment. There are actions, for example, in the area of facilitating access to land. If you want to establish production of renewable energy, you need space. And there are some good examples, including under some World Bank financed projects. We have the REWA project example, or the solar parks project, which was also part of a mission, the National Solar Mission. Under that mission, we worked with the government to facilitate the identification of land and invest in shared infrastructure in those plots to tell the private sector, look, the basic infrastructure is already there. You're not going to struggle to find the land and put the pipes, and it's already there. All you need to come with your boxes, and you build your plant and you start producing. The second thing we did, which with the government, is to come up with mechanism for bulk purchase agreement, because when the private sector produces, they're not sure whether they'll be able to sell their output, especially in new sectors that are emerging. So we agreed with some big consumers. In the case of REWA in Madhya Pradesh, there was an agreement with Delhi Metro to bulk purchase their output, and that helped private investors come in. The other thing that you will want the government to do also to attract the private sector more broadly, and specifically in the energy sector, which is skills. When investors come, they want to make sure that they have people to work in their factories, people who are skilled enough. So there is a need to invest more in skills, more in talent. And where the skills and talent are not available, maybe you want to make the labor market flexible enough for investors to be able to import workers from other states or perhaps from elsewhere in the world. Then there are the issues of what will happen if the investor has a conflict with some other investors or with some clients. So you want to have convey to the private sector that there will be mechanism to resolve conflict, to settle conflict quicker, really quicker, so that they know what will happen to their investment. And then a few other steps, but the government is thinking about those already and has done a lot, as I said, in some of these areas, and perhaps there are a few more things to do.
Right. My final set of questions. What is the cost for a country like India if we don't focus enough on energy transition, on climate action right now? We have been seeing a climate crisis, and that has been impacting us in different ways through flooding, through heavy waterlogging, water scarcity. So any recommendations that you've recently made to the government, any warning signs that you pick up?
Well, you know, the good news is that when it comes to climate, no government needs advice anymore, because we all know the issues. We all know that the crisis is upon us. It is a clear and present danger. We live it every day. So I will say that 2 or 3 buckets of issues. One is on adaptation. The climate change is upon us. It's going to actually get a bit worse before it gets better. So how do we protect people? How do we protect households? How do we protect firms? How do we protect systems, infrastructure? And if that protection doesn't happen, we know what happened. You lose a lot of lives or a lot of assets. So first message is what we call adaptation. Invest in adaptation and resilience. Invest, really well, knowing that this is not a safe place. This is not a safe world. By place, I mean the globe. The planet is no longer as comfortable, as easy to live as it used to be. So we need to invest in protecting ourselves. That's adaptation. And it's, in India, it means making sure the coast safer, making air quality better, investing in improving all these things. So that's adaptation and resilience. The second bucket is, how do we act to reduce the pace of how do we reduce our impact on climate in the future? How do we reduce the harm? How do we ensure that we don't put up more greenhouse gases or more CO2s or more methane out there, which will make things even worse? So that's the bucket of mitigation. And for that, the challenge is what a country does benefits others.
Right.
It doesn't benefit that country alone, because the air has no limit, the space has no limit. What we produce here, the bad thing we put in the air in country A comes to India and vice versa. So what our advice is, for a country like India, which is not one of the biggest emitters at the moment, if you look at emission per capita, India's emission level is quite low. India's energy consumption per capita is 1/3 of the global average. And the emissions are below global average per capita. But India is a big country. So if you add everything that each of us living here in India produce, even though it is a small quantity per person, when we add it up, it adds to a big number because the population is large. And as the economy grows, even though the GDP emission per GDP is not high, because the GDP itself is large, the average total emission is quite significant.
Right.
So our advice is India will have a role to play in helping the world meet the global mitigation objectives, but that will also help India. Why? Because, as I mentioned earlier, the world is now, every consumer is paying more attention to what is the CO2 content, what's the carbon footprint of what they're consuming. The European CBAM, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, is telling us if you don't reduce the emission content of your GDPs, you're not going to have the global market as your marketplace.
Right.
It's going to shut down on you. And India, big economy, will need to export. So for India, the benefits of investing more in mitigation is to protect the economic gains and be able to continue to be the powerful economy that India will be, very soon, and be able to export its goods so that it doesn't become too challenging. And so there are benefits there. And of course, there are additional benefits such as, creating jobs. India is a big economy, and therefore, if India invests in renewable energy, in energy transition, this will create jobs because it is a growing area.
Right.
To create new jobs that are actually perhaps more inclusive than the jobs in traditional industries. because they're easier to do, they require more talent, they
Right.
can be done from home, you know, so more people can join the labor market, including women who can work more in these new technologies than they would have been able to work in hydrocarbon, for example.
Okay.
And finally, it will also show India's leadership in this area. And leadership in the world is an intangible, but it means a lot.
Thank you very much, Auguste Tano, for speaking to us, telling us about the green hydrogen mission and the second phase of support from the World Bank for the India government, and also your projections for the Indian economy. Thank you once again for talking to us. That's all we have time for on this special broadcast. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.